Why don't modern horror films need jump scares to terrify us? When did the genre stop trying to make us flinch and start trying to make us think? Once upon a time, horror was simple. A shadow moved, a door creaked, a monster stepped into the light, and the audience screamed. But something changed. The monsters faded and the real horror moved inward. No longer fangs and claws, but grief, guilt, isolation, the ghosts we carry inside our heads. The genre evolved quietly into something far more intimate. No more cheap jolts. Now the fear lingers. It unsettles. It asks questions that can't be answered and plants images you can't quite shake. This is not just a history of horror. It's a dissection, a journey into the anatomy of fear itself. Because the deeper we look into the shadows of cinema, the more clearly we see ourselves. In the beginning, horror was not subtle. It was spectacle. It lived in the shadows that flickered against the theatre walls, in the faces of creatures born from ink and nightmare. Nosferatu, Frankenstein, Dracula. These were not metaphors. They were monsters. Embodiments of everything mysterious and forbidden, crawling out from humanity's oldest fears: death, disease, desire. Cinema itself was still new, and so was fear on screen. Audiences had never seen the impossible come alive before. The way Nosferatu's silhouette stretched along the wall, thin, inhuman, eternal. It wasn't just a trick of light, it was an encounter with the unknown. The birth of cinematic horror was, in truth, the birth of our collective fascination with fear. Everything about those films was handcrafted terror. Before computers, fear was engineered through ingenuity. Smoke machines, prosthetics, harsh lighting, and music that clawed at the nerves. Sound was a weapon. Silence was a threat. A sudden violin shriek, a window slamming in the night. This was the dawn of the jump scare. It wasn't yet cliché, it was a revelation. Imagine sitting in a darkened theatre in the 1930s, never having seen a moving monster before. The film flickers, the shadows move, and suddenly, something leaps from the screen. For the first time in cinematic history, fear became interactive.
Put her down! Put her down!
The audience wasn't just watching, they were participating, their screams and gasps becoming part of the experience. Those early directors like James Whale and Todd Browning understood something primal. Fear could be beautiful. The chiaroscuro lighting, the gothic sets, the symphony of terror. It was horror as art, and the audience adored it. They came to the theatre to feel something real, something that reminded them they were alive. Because horror, at its core, was never just about death or monsters. It was about sensation, the cold thrill running down your spine, the release that follows the scream. It was the first time people learned to love being afraid, to chase the adrenaline, to dance with dread. In that flickering era of black and white, fear found its first home, and the monsters on the screen were only the beginning. The rise of the slasher and the jump scare craze. By the 1970s, horror had traded castles for suburbs and myths for masks. The monsters were no longer creatures of legend, they were human. Ordinary, wearing knives instead of fangs. Halloween, Friday the 13th, a nightmare on Elm Street. Fear became physical, bloody, and immediate. Every creak of a floorboard meant someone was about to die. The jump scare evolved into a formula: silence, suspense, and then boom, a flash of terror. But repetition breeds immunity. The audience began to learn the rhythm of fear, the pause before the scream, the cue before the kill. What once made hearts race now drew nervous laughter. Yet beneath the slashing and screaming, these films were doing something deeper. They were mirrors of a culture terrified of itself, of teenagers, of freedom, of moral decay. In the age of VHS and Reagan, horror became both punishment and confession. Violent, yes, but also revealing. The monsters on screen weren't just chasing victims, they were chasing society's guilt. The psychological turn, unsettling the mind. By the late 20th century, horror turned inward. The monsters grew quieter, no longer hiding in the woods or under the bed, but in the corners of our own reflection. The slasher's knife dulled, and in its place came something sharper. The mind. Films like The Shining, The Sixth Sense, Black Swan, and The Babadook shifted the battlefield. Fear was no longer about survival. It was about understanding what happens when sanity begins to fracture. Stanley Kubrick didn't need blood to terrify. He had hallways that stretched into infinity, a father unraveling in slow motion, and a child who saw what no one else could. These films made horror intellectual and far more personal. The monster became a metaphor. In The Babadook, it was grief wearing a top hat.
You can't get rid of the Babadook.
You can bring me the boy. You can bring.
In Black Swan, it was obsession, eating its way through perfection.
Please believe me.
Sweet girl. What happened to my sweet girl?
In The Sixth Sense, it was isolation, a child's invisible burden of truth.
That they know that you're one of these very rare people who can see them, so you need to help them.
And in The Shining, the Overlook Hotel wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by addiction, violence, and a father's despair.
Here's Johnny!
The horror was no longer about dying. It was about feeling too much. It was the suffocating quiet after trauma, the paralysis of guilt, the claustrophobia of your own thoughts. These films didn't ask you to scream. They asked you to sit in silence and feel the dread grow, and that's what made them unforgettable. You left the theatre not shaken, but unsettled, not terrified by what you saw, but haunted by what you understood. Because when horror turns psychological, it stops being about them and becomes about us. It whispers a truth far scarier than any jump scare, that the darkest places aren't in haunted houses or cursed woods. They're in the human mind, locked behind memories we refuse to face, waiting for the right story to open the door. Modern masters of the mind game. In the 21st century, horror found its poets. Jordan Peele, Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, filmmakers who treat fear not as a gimmick, but as philosophy. Their films don't chase you through the dark. They sit beside you and whisper truths you don't want to hear. In Get Out, Jordan Peele turned racial anxiety into a waking nightmare, horror as social mirror, forcing us to confront the quiet violence beneath politeness. Ari Aster's Hereditary and Midsummer transformed grief and heartbreak into ritual. His worlds are bright, open, and suffocating. Sunlight as a weapon, silence as a scream. And Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse is madness in isolation, where dialogue becomes delirium and the sea itself feels like it's judging you. Critics call it elevated horror, cinema that's artistic, symbolic, self-aware, but maybe elevated misses the point. Because whether it's an A24 nightmare or a classic slasher, horror has always been about seeing ourselves, stripped of comfort, confronted by fear. These directors don't just make movies, they build psychological environments. They manipulate sound until silence hurts, and space until it feels too small to breathe. Their horror doesn't end with the credits. It lingers, in thought, in dream, in the uneasy quiet that follows. Because today's horror isn't louder, it's smarter, it's patient. It knows that the scariest sound of all is your own heartbeat echoing in the dark. The future of fear, blurring lines and deepening dread. The future of horror isn't bound to the screen. It's bleeding into the spaces we live in. Now, fear isn't just something we watch, it's something we experience. Interactive horror games place us inside the nightmare. Virtual reality turns every corner, every shadow, into a potential threat.
I know who you are.
We need to do this right now. Okay, let's get him down.
And as AI begins to write stories and build worlds, the line between creator and creature starts to blur. We're no longer safe behind the fourth wall, we're part of the experiment. The digital age has birthed new monsters, not vampires or ghosts, but algorithms that know our fears better than we do. Endless surveillance, online isolation, fractured identity, the horrors of connection in an overconnected world. It's no longer the unknown that terrifies us, but the too well known. Yet through every decade, every innovation, horror adapts. Because fear evolves with us, reflecting each era's anxieties, each generation's ghosts. From castles to cities, from theatres to headsets, it never dies. It just learns new ways to whisper our name. Maybe the scariest thing isn't what's on the screen, but what it reflects back at us. Horror has always been a reflection, a dark mirror held up to the world and to ourselves. From the shadows of silent film to the quiet dread of the mind, it's never just been about fear. It's about recognition, about the things we bury, the truths we hide, the emotions too heavy for daylight. Every era rediscovers the same truth. We don't watch horror to feel safe. We watch it to feel alive. Because in fear, there's honesty, there's vulnerability, there's humanity. And as the world changes, so will our nightmares. New faces, new sounds, new shadows, all waiting to remind us who we really are when the lights go out. Horror never dies. It just learns new ways to find us.